The Shroud of Turin is a length of linen cloth that bears the negative image of a man, with many claiming it was the burial shroud in which Jesus of Nazareth was wrapped after his crucifixion in Jerusalem. It first appeared on the historical records at around 1353 and since then has baffled historians, Christians, and scientists as to its authenticity. In this video we will explain its history and try to come up with a conclusion on whether it is actually the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. The linen in which Jesus was wrapped has always been an object of interest for Christians. The first reference to it is in a 2nd century manuscript called the Gospel of the Hebrews, in which it is stated, "And after he had given the linen cloth to the servant of the priest, he appeared to James," referring to Jesus after his resurrection. The Gospel of John also states that Jesus was wrapped in something after his death. However, many separate cloths were used, with a napkin being placed on Jesus's face, not a single large linen as is the Shroud of Turin. The other 3 Gospels however refer to a singular fine linen cloth. Historically, the traditional manner of burial in Jerusalem was to wrap a body in many different cloths and placing a napkin on their face, as is stated in the Gospel of John. Disregarding these incongruences, the next historical reference to a shroud in which Jesus was wrapped is in the year 1204, when a knight named Robert de Clary, who participated in the sacking of Constantinople in the 4th Crusade, wrote that the cloth was among the countless relics in the city. Where there was the shroud in which our Lord had been wrapped, which every Friday was raised upright so one could see the figure of our Lord on it. And none knows, neither Greek nor Frank, what became of that shroud when the city was taken. On August 1, 1205, the following letter was sent to Pope Innocent III, talking about the siege of Constantinople. The Venetians partitioned the treasures of gold, silver, and ivory, while the French did the same with the relics of the saints and the most sacred of all, the linen in which our Lord Jesus Christ was wrapped after his death and before the resurrection. We know that the sacred objects are preserved by their predators in Venice, in France, and in other places, the sacred linen in Athens. However, it is unknown whether any of these messages refer to the actual Shroud of Turin, as the modern object can be traced historically to the year 1355, when the widow of a French knight had apparently displayed it in a church at Lirey, France. It was dismissed by the priesthood of the time as a painting. Later, in 1389, the image was once again denounced, stating that, eventually, after diligent inquiry and examination, he discovered how the said cloth had been cunningly painted, the truth being attested by the artist who had painted it, to wit, that it was a work of human skill and not miraculously wrought or bestowed. Following this is a long history of transfers where the shroud was sold for various prices, at one time being transferred in exchange for a castle in the French countryside. As of the beginning of the 16th century, however, the cloth was being stored in various churches, and in 1578 it was taken to Turin, where it has remained ever since. The scientific studies surrounding the shroud have, unfortunately, not favored its authenticity. After years of discussion, independent tests were held in 1988 for the radiocarbon dating of the Shroud of Turin, which concluded with 95% confidence that the shroud material dated to 1260 to 1390 AD. This is, obviously, much too recent for the shroud to have been associated with Jesus, but does match the first appearance of the shroud in history. Although attempts have been made to discount these claims, they are held to this day as scientifically accurate. In 2013, a supposed piece of the fabric was analyzed with vibrational spectroscopy and dated to between 300 BC and 400 AD. However, the maintainer of the shroud stated that as it is not possible to be certain that the analyzed material was taken from the fabric of the shroud, no serious value can be recognized to the results of such experiments. In the 1970s, a study was conducted in order to test for the presence of pigment particles in the shroud, and these were successfully located, concluding that the image was actually made up of billions of submicrometer pigment particles. It is also important to note that there are no satisfying explanations for the manner in which the image was drawn on the cloth, if it was naturally created. An interesting theory is that it was created by burial aromas and ointments, although this would require a quote-unquote significant energy source nearby. The paper leaves the existence of this energy source an open question. More evidence to disprove the authenticity comes from analysis of the materials used to fabricate the cloth, which is stitched together in herringbone twill, a form of weave that was practically alien to 1st century Jerusalem. In 2000, fragments of a burial shroud were discovered near Jerusalem which dated to around the same time as Jesus' crucifixion, and these were made in a simple two-way weave, unlike the complex weave of the Turin shroud. However, other studies have contradicted this claim, stating that it is completely within possibility that the cloth originate as a high-quality product of the textile workers of the 1st century. Finally, let us analyze the anatomical consistency of the image on the shroud. Initially it was claimed as anatomically flawless, although many arguments for both sides have been presented. Some scientists state that the face and proportions of the shroud image are impossible, and that the figure cannot represent that of an actual person, concluding that it was the work of a Gothic artist. In 2018, another study showed that the blood flow displayed in the image is not consistent with death by crucifixion. It is possible, though, that the body was washed before being placed in the shroud. A few other studies claim the image is anatomically correct, and there is no real conclusion that can be drawn due both to the subjective nature of this analysis and the possible religious motives behind a certain conclusion. Therefore, we can ascertain with good probability that the Shroud of Turin is a hoax, created between the 11th and 13th centuries and successively switched ownership until it ended up in the hands of the Turin Cathedral. Regardless of its authenticity, it is a very important historical artifact and a beautiful work of art. As for this video, thanks for watching and we hope to see you soon once again.